Hey, folks. Taylor here today with Dr. Kenna Barrett. Stoked about this conversation where we are talking about schmoozing. And Kenna, I don't know about you, but I like saying that word.
It's
Uh,
hard to say schmoozing. Yes.
it's hard to get schmoozing. It can be a dirty sounding word, and we're going to talk about that today. But to kick us off, we're going to talk about the art and the science of schmoozing because it is something that we all do in business, even in personal relationships, perhaps, right? And in the world of fundraising, right? If you're a nonprofit, so whether you're in sales or business or nonprofit, everybody schmoozes, and that can come off as a dirty word, but it doesn't have to be. And it is something that we can learn the art and science of and use to our benefit to help actually just build authentic relationships. So, Kenna, to get us kicked off, give us a quick background about who you are, what's your expertise, and why you like this topic of schmoozing so much, because you did a TEDx talk on it recently.
Sure. Yeah, I love the topic, and I'm sort of trying to reinvent the term a little bit. I define it as a pleasant conversation toward a goal. And I became interested in this because I was a recovering academic. I was going to be in one of those little ivory tower silo kind of things where I wouldn't have to schmooze at all. And that sounded great. But then, as you go through your life, you realize that you do have to interact with people, no matter where you're going to be placed. And I fell into the role of fundraising a number of years ago, and I ended up at Yale University in New Haven, and I was doing grant writing. And I thought, oh gosh, I looked at everyone that was working with individuals, and they would work with donors and alumni and so forth. I thought, oh gosh, I could never do that. That seems really complicated. And the gentleman that was like the lead person at Yale that worked with individual donors had like a set of golf clubs in his office, and seemed like he sort of walked the walk and talked the talk. And I imagine he'd just be asking for millions of dollars as they were teeing off. But then I fell into a role where I had to do that. I got invited to work as a major gift officer at Yale. And I have to tell you, I was transformed by what I learned about how this actually works. And that's what I'm here to talk about today.
So, okay, something that you said made me think of something that I want to bring up and get into, and that's. But first, we'll go into the mental game of schmoozing. But I want to put a pin in this, if it's cool with you. I want to put a pin in the differences, maybe perhaps in schmoozing as a female or a male in the business world, even because you mentioned golf clubs and this guy's office. And that is something that, old school world, a lot of guys go out and schmooze each other on golf course, right? And a lot of females now are like, I don't want to play golf, but like I'm here, I'm at the table. So we'll get into that, okay? But first, tell me a little bit more about this mental game of schmoozing and like what does that even mean?
Yeah, well, I think, I became interested in this question of the mental game actually a number of years ago before I even became a fundraiser. There's a book called The Inner Game of Tennis, and it was really famous, written in the 70s. And it was by this guy, Timothy Galway, who was coaching tennis. And he found that the newer people were trying to remember all these different things, like have your hand back, have your elbow this way, stand this way, move toward the ball, all kinds of stuff. And they were getting their own way. And so he devise some things about kind of letting your body move naturally and tapping into some other processing systems of your body, not just the cognitive sort of declarative learning kind of thing, and learning how to play tennis that way. So it was really interesting. There was one for music, and I was a musician, so I read all that, and I really started thinking, wow, we don't talk about the inner game, what kind of an attitude you need to have. But I realized in many of the careers that you, Taylor, are sort of talking to people about, it's not a motor sport. It's not something where your body is sort of moving and that's the first thing that's happening. It really is about conversations and dialogue. And so you do need to learn. So what I teach about schmoozing is that you have to adopt the right attitude. Okay, and we'll talk about that. You have to reverse engineer what your situation is, and then you have to expect the unexpected. I always say that. A former boss of mine used to say that it's always true. And I think the right attitude that you have to adopt, instead of thinking that, fundraising or schmoozing is for, as you said, a guy that golfs or a lady that lunches, and you just have this charisma, which, as you're pointing out, Taylor, often has to do with your social standing, your gender, your identity, and sort of more than your personal charisma anyway. There's a myth about charisma, but that I advise people to leave beside, let it go. That doesn't matter as much as your attitude and your perseverance. And I have so many examples of how, you learn to persevere, and that's much more important. And so many researchers have found that grit, perseverance is more important than either, emotional intelligence or even, whatever your quote IQ may be. It really is, it's critical to adopt that sort of learning and perseverance-based mindset. So that's, I think, that the first kind of key with schmoozing.
So let's dig into that, the attitude first. What kind of attitude do you need to show up with when you, again, I think it's a dirty sounding word, but it's actually really just that, I don't know, starting a dialogue and being able to play that mental game of tennis sometimes, like you said, and being able to show up, right, and have the conversation and do a back and forth. But what's the necessary attitude that you need to bring to the table?
I think the necessary attitude is that anyone can learn to do this. That's number one. And where I discovered this, as I said, I got this opportunity to be an individual fundraiser, and instead of being this sort of natural thing where you just went out and they gave you lots of money, we broke everything down. We broke down the conversation that we wanted to have, the kinds of things we wanted to say, and even specifically how we would make an ask if we were going to make an ask. Down to the words that you would use and the amount that you would ask for. And I saw people that go out on the road, they come back from a day where maybe they got a no, or they had some kind of funny response, and we'd share stories and we'd use that to improve and get better and learn. So I think, the first thing as a fundraiser, the attitude is that you can do this. It's not some kind of invisible thing that just happens between two people that are talking. You have to figure out what's your goal and how are you going to get there. And that's what then when I get into the reverse engineering, we can talk about some examples there. That's where you're kind of figuring out what your goal is. And I feel like for many people who, they're not just that kind of person, if there is such a person, that, they just enjoy sitting and gabbing for hours on end, you have to figure out what your goal is and how you're going to get there. And that sort of helps you think through the process.
So, okay, yeah, let's dig into the reverse engineering. And again, I think, this is something that's scary for people who are introverted, right? It seems like, that's only for extroverts. Okay, so let's get into reverse engineering. What exactly do you mean by that when you're thinking about it in this context?
Yeah, so I can use an example from fundraising, and then Taylor, if you have other kinds of disciplines or activities, we can talk what that might look like. But with fundraising, I think of you divide it into 3 acts or 3 parts, really. There's that beginning part of the meeting where you're just getting to know someone, and they just sit down, and you kind of need this icebreaker. You need to figure out what to say in that very moment where maybe they're transitioning from a day at work and they're sitting down with you at a restaurant, or you've just come in from some crazy taxi ride and it's raining. So what do you say to just get the ball rolling? And I think that can be one of the toughest things. And I always thought, oh gosh, well, if I don't know about hedge funds, or I don't know about golf or whatever, how am I ever going to connect with this person? Or they've got some esoteric art on their wall and I have no idea what that is. But you just pick something, even if you're just learning and you say, I like that piece of art, and they go on about it and you say, well, that's really cool. And you could say what kind of art you like. You have to start somewhere. Even if it's something you have a nice pin on, or you see some pictures of family if you're in their office. I talked about how, connecting over family members, kids, maybe that can be one of those shared experiences, even if it's rainy out or both of you were late or something, some sort of shared humanity where you start with that sort of that intro. And then for a fundraising conversation, the other 2 acts would be the part where you're really listening and learning. And fundraisers have this thing called the 60-40 rule. And it really is that you want to think of yourself as talking like at the most 40% and inviting the other person to really take up more than 60% of the conversational space for many reasons. One, if people enjoy that, they feel heard when you're asking questions and listening to them. And number two, when you're asking questions, you're getting to know them, their interests, what might be appealing and motivating to them. So that's sort of the second piece of sort of the anatomy of a fundraising conversation or schmooze. And then that third one is, of course, what we all think of as the pitch, where we all think if you haven't done this for a while, you think you got to just be on the ball and you got to go through something and you maybe have, something to show them, when really it's a conversation where you're trying to connect them to your organization. So you're talking about what's special about that organization. You're even talking about what brought you to the table. I might talk about this as well. So in that third piece, it's not just I've got something to show you, but it's here's why I am here. Here's why this means something to me. I know this means something to you as well. And here's where you would be needed. So if you kind of break it down into those three parts, and then you kind of within each, you can get more detailed. But that's how I recommend going about things. So when we talk about any other kind of schmoozing scenario, that's the fundraising one.
Well, I very much still think that lines up very closely to someone who's in sales, right? And so I also talk frequently. I talk to nonprofit fundraisers frequently, and I talk to salespeople frequently. So in both, for-profit and social impact sectors. And I do think there's a lot of things that are just very similar. A couple of things that I heard in that I like and want to dig in on is just start somewhere. And if you don't know what to say, ask a question about them. That is the easiest way. If you're uncomfortable in situations with a new person who you don't know, or you're not quite sure what they're going to be into or where to start with, just ask a question about them. People like to talk about themselves and what they're doing and what matters to them, especially in that context of fundraising. If they're going to be giving you a gift to an organization, they're going to be caring about sharing maybe their story with it or their connection. And so the second part of that is listening, right? Being a better schmoozer is about being a better listener. Being better at building relationships is about being better at listening. So I really like that you mentioned the 60-40 rule. Don't take all the air out of the room yourself. Do a lot of listening.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I have, students who kind of say, okay, I've mastered the question thing. I'm asking all these questions, but wait, how do I get to that third part about telling them why I'm here? I'm kind of stuck in question mode. And that, happens to me all the time. You want to know, there's lots of interesting things to ask them. And so how do you get, out of the questioning mode if they're still going? Is at some point, you can just say, well, I know, I'm here. I wanted to talk to you about such and such institution, or something you said really spoke to me, and that's exactly what we're doing at XYZ Foundation. You kind of try to build on something they said, and if not, you just here's who I want to talk to you today, and I'm here because such and such. And so then you do need to at some point go into why you're there. But as you said, same with sales, where people there's a lot of focus on, well, I'll teach you how to ask with confidence. And it's interesting. I don't know what you think about this, but sometimes confidence can be a double-edged sword. I've had many students say, when I feel really confident, I start just chattering away and I'm not able to slow myself down. So, it's less about, gosh, do I feel really confident? We would all love to feel confident doing this. And really, am I just thinking through the steps? Am I listening? Is this person receptive? And now it's time for me to just talk about the impact of how they can get involved and what that would mean. So, it is really, it's interest-based. It's, some of that interest-based bargaining stuff where you're looking for some overlap in interests. You're looking for, a mutual feel-good kind of situation. But you have to, if you keep it about that person, even though you're talking about the institution, you're talking about what brought you there, it still kind of works. It's still about, it centers that person, it centers your organization.
I think there's a fine line between confidence and arrogance, right? And so, and that probably comes up in the world of schmoozing. Do you have recommendations around how to stay on the right side of the line and of confidence and not arrogance?
Yeah, I think, again, it's just, taking that breath. If you're someone that, your thing is to keep talking or keep pitching, just, understand that's not always what's going to close your gift or get you to your schmoozing goal. And sometimes it can just be, asking feedback. One thing that we don't do enough, I think, is bring colleagues along with us on a conversation or pitch session or whatever it might be, and get some feedback and kind of find that out. But I think, on those times that I've had someone that was really hard selling, it doesn't really work that well. So I think just kind of take a breath, take a moment, take a breath, kind of ask yourself, you really have to do those check-ins. Am I asking enough questions? Am I letting the person express themselves? And sometimes you don't want to hear if they have an objection, right? That's part of the sort of cognitive biases that go into how we prepare. Sometimes, we're preparing through, okay, this person, they might say yes, or they might say, let me think about it. But we're not thinking about, those difficult objections they might have. I've had so many times I'm ready to go. I've got my pitch, I've got my points, and they come out with something that I just didn't plan for because I probably didn't want to think about, well, what if they ask me this question? So, I think that's the other piece, is just making sure that we're open in our preparation to, getting those challenging questions. And you might be in a situation where you say, I don't know, but I will, I'll follow up and let you know, or that's a really good question. And sometimes I think we just talk because we don't might not want to know what they have to say.
Yeah. So let's get into recommendations for the people. Again, I kind of really want to think through the introverted person's mindset who's in a position where, and let's go back to like the guys on the golf course, the ladies on who lunches.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I don't identify with that. How do I facilitate the right kind of meeting to make a pitch for a gift, a major gift for a nonprofit, or make a big pitch for a sale? What recommendations do you have for those people that don't identify in that space? I think it's very important, and I'm just like, my opinion, gone are the days of like, I know it still happens, of like, everyone's got to be on the golf course and lunching and everything like that. But so what are your recommendations there?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously something that you're pointing out is that it is an industry-wide, it's a corporate-wide, institutional, structural thing sometimes that people, we're not always as inclusive as we should be. And we expect people to sort of speak certain languages, golf or sports or whatever it may be, that they don't. So I think part of what you're pointing to is, absolutely structural barriers to people for getting into this. I think there's much more awareness about that. And I think, though, if you're somebody where, we're leaving the structural thing aside and you still, there's this kind of tacit expectation that you might talk about something you don't know about, whether it's sports or maybe whether it's parenting and you don't have children. There's different barriers that anyone could encounter. What if you're neurodivergent? There's so many different ways. And I think, the advice is to figure out what you have to bring to the table and bring just that. For instance, I could use the fact that I had an academic background, and sometimes people would ask me, well, what's your background in? And I would just talk about the research I'd done or whatever, even though it's not sports or it's not hedge funds or whatever I thought, a high net worth individual might want to talk about. It's just what worked for me. And I think I figured out what I brought to the table. And when I was in a university, that academic experience gave some credibility, even if it wasn't in the same field. So I think you figure out what is it that you bring, and you have everyone listening, everyone in this audience has lots to offer, and you just figure out what that may be for that context. I don't know if that quite answers it, but if you're not going to golf, you don't ask them to go to the golf course and meet you.
Yeah. First off, just don't suggest it. Anybody can ask anyone out for coffee, right? So start with coffee.
Coffee seems pretty universal,
or normal lunch, right? I think about. I'd love to hear maybe an example or story from you, but I think about times when I have been in those business situations, maybe at a sporting event, maybe at a baseball game. I remember a time at a baseball game, and I mean, I can sit there and watch baseball. It's not my thing, but and I don't follow the team that we were at or anything like that. So I think there's ways to just start a conversation that's not about baseball, even though you're at a baseball game watching it. I think you don't have to automatically assume that you have to talk about the sporting event or whatever. Like, ask people about their personal hobbies, like start the conversation on like, hey, what drives you? What so I would recommend coming up, and you can even practice this, and it's okay to practice this at home by yourself or with a partner or spouse or friend or whatever. But practice just like what kind of questions can help get into people's heads and get a conversation going that can just, like you said, I think mentioned earlier, like connect on a human level, and not so much being so focused and so concerned and worried about, oh my gosh, I'm going to this Cubs game and I don't know anything about the Cubs and I don't follow the Cubs and start with something else.
You might find they don't either. Or maybe
they might not either. Exactly. They might also be in the same boat, and then you find that out and then you can laugh about it.
Yes, exactly. Totally agree.
Have you had any sort of experience like that where you're like, this was not my domain, but I made the most of it by doing X, Y, or Z?
Oh, sure. Well, I worked at a law school for many years, and, I wasn't a lawyer, so I would go out with our dean or senior leader, and it would just be like international arbitration, this, and the Alien Tort Claims Act, that. And it was, it was a little challenging. But I had to realize that wasn't really my job. That's why that dean was there. And I tried to get to know those individuals that we were sitting across the table from in a different way. So, one person, it was their birthday, and we asked their assistant what they like. And it was like some kind of, it wasn't anything fancy. It was like chocolate covered pretzels or something, and we just, brought that. So you just try to find your way in. Sometimes you can just say, if it's someone that's in the news or something, I really appreciated your broadcaster, really appreciated your work on this thing. So sometimes it just is making sure that they know that who they are, what they do, even if you're not that well versed in it. Sometimes it's asking people about it. You just go right to it. What how did you get into finance? Or how did you get to leading this company? And, you get really interesting things. Someone might say, well, I grew up with 5 siblings. And so it was always a question of, negotiating their needs, and it positioned me for management. So you kind of feel your way through. There's no one question or one thing that you can say. You feel your way through with that person. I have last story. You have a relative that, sometimes I have to ask maybe 10 different questions of different topics before they're off to the races. But then when I hit the right topic, it's, they're so excited and interesting to talk about it. So you just get trial and error.
Yeah, absolutely. And look at it as a learning opportunity. If you don't know what that person knows, use that opportunity to ask questions and learn. And even I think it's okay to be vulnerable and say, I don't know as much about this as you, but you do. Tell me about why this interests you. Tell me about something interesting that's happened to you in this, arena, right? And take the opportunity to learn from it, because you never know if you're going to be able to use that in another scenario with someone else on the same topic area down the road. And you're like, learned about this one time when I was at that Cubs game and didn't know anything about finance, right? Exactly. So Daniel says, people like to talk about themselves and they love interesting compliments. Exactly. So that goes back to what you said earlier, Kenna, about asking questions and listening. And I think as you get people to pull the story out of people, that's what I've learned, to get them talking about their own story with either the pain point that they have that your product or service is going to solve for them, or the mission, if you're in fundraising, that you are offering and the impact that you're going to have. Pull that story out of them about why they care about this or why they need this.
Yeah. And just remember that you are the expert at your institution or your product, or if you're in sales, that product or service that you're selling. And even if you're across the table from someone you feel as an expert, you still know what's going on at that company, that institution. Story for anyone who's listening who's in sales. I have a very good friend who is high up in a pharma company, and so she was a technical expert, and she went to meet with the sales team to give a little talk. And she said, I wasn't sure what to expect, but these salespeople were on it. They knew so much. They knew more about the product in some cases than I did, and they were engaged and interested. So, sales folks, fundraising folks, you know it, you have it. you are experts and you can own that.
Awesome. To close us out, do you have any final secrets in the art and science of schmoozing? I don't know, maybe one or two final secrets you would leave us with, or wisdom bombs you'd drop on us.
Well, I think as I've said, seek out mentors. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Say, how am I doing? How would you approach this? That sort of idea of reverse engineering is really important. Analyze it. Even I guess the Navy, when they have the Blue Angels, the flying team, every time they come back to the ground, they look at every single movement and they deconstruct anything that might have gone wrong, so that they can make sure that next time they have it right. So just keep asking, keep questioning, keep looking at what you're doing, and keep the faith, because you will learn and you'll do great.
Keep the faith. Yeah, you said that at the start. Perseverance is number one.
Absolutely.
Having that attitude, just coming in with a positive attitude and persevering is key. And schmoozing is not a dirty word. All right. I hope that was the takeaway
No,
from
you
today.
own it.
Own it. Own it. Practice it. Get better at it. It's about building relationships. It's not about being a snake oil salesman. It's about building relationships. And that's really what I hope people take away from this conversation today, Kenna. And I appreciate you sharing with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Taylor.
Yeah. If people want to follow along, get in touch with you, talk more, watch your TED Talk. What's the best way to do that? And I can put links into the comments on this. But what's the best way to reach you and find you?
To the comments, and I am on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way to reach me, is just friend me or reach out, send me a message on LinkedIn, and I can share the links too, Taylor.
Awesome. All right. Well, hey, thanks, Kenna. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. I hope this was helpful. And we hope that you have learned a thing or two about schmoozing to make your own relationship building process a little easier and a little bit less scary today. We'll see you next time.
You.
Bye, folks.